World War II shaped the lives of a generation. The war broke families apart, brought communities together, and turned a depressed economy into an industrial machine. On the home front, citizens sold war bonds and collected scrap metal for the factories. Friends were made and lost as a generation of boys was sent into combat. Penn State Public Broadcasting invited those who lived this history to share their stories of World War II.
We were afraid because we heard stories of possible bombers coming and bombing the shops, and almost every child had their father working for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And my father was a machinist at the maintenance and erecting shop in Juniata. And we were always afraid that they were going to bomb the Horseshoe Curve because that was our water supply. And when you went to the Horseshoe Curve, you couldn't stop. There were guards there, and if you were heading to Glitzen or somewhere, you had to keep moving. You couldn't stop at all. And we had a victory garden from our house clear out to the garage, which helped with vegetables and so forth in the summer. We had ration books for meat and sugar and flour and shoes, gasoline. My parents each had a gas ration stipulated by how much they used their vehicles. My father had a higher ration because he drove to work, and my mother just was called pleasure driving for her car. We had a 1938 Pontiac, and we happened to have bought a 1941 Pontiac. The old one was kind of just a gray, drab color, and it was a bright new two-tone beige and brownish color, and we were so happy with that car. And it was really neat because the whole time during the war, that was the newest car you could have because they didn't build any till 1946. It was a lot of fun to ride around it. And my dad had an old car, a Model T Ford, which we collected scrap in and so forth to take down to the school. We had a large family. I had 4 sisters, and we would all pile in the car, and we'd go for a ride with as much gas as we had and just drive along farm roads and gather milkweed pods. And they had to be still sealed. They couldn't be burst. And put them into bags and take them to the school, which they in turn shipped out to fill life vests and flyers jackets for warmth and buoyancy for the life jackets. We had what you called a weekly reader, and it had all the news of government interest, whether there was a bombing somewhere, or who was the best government leader, or who was the best Army or Navy or so forth leader. And there were maps and showed us where the war was actually happening in different places. Interesting. I had to make a little art project that was a shield-shaped folder, and it had all the insignia of all the Army people in it, and we had to know who they were. If we saw a soldier, we had to be able to say, oh, that's a lieutenant or that's a sergeant or whatever. It was a lot of fun. And we also had a big chart on our school wall that showed planes from the bottom. So when you looked up, you could say, oh, that's a B-29 or that's a transport or whatever, to learn what. And then the older kids were in a group of people that actually watched the skies, but the little kids didn't do that. When we went to school, every day we had to have our little ID tag on. It was a silver chain and just a little round placard, hard material with our name and address and our parents' names and our phone number written in indelible ink. And if you didn't wear it, you had to go home and get it before you could come to school. There used to be blackouts, and we had our house completely dark, we thought, and there was a little tiny green eye on the front of our floor model radio, and he could see that from the street. So he came and knocked at the door and said, there's light coming out of your house, so we had to hang something over front of that while the radio was on. It was neat. We were scared. I'm not saying we were unhappy or that we were always scared, but there were times if you're laying in bed and you hear a plane going over, and actually planes weren't real common in those days anyways, and if a plane went over, you laid there real still hoping that they weren't going to be flying over to bomb the shops. That's all you'd think about. Through my church, the Church of the Brethren was very concerned about moving these people from California, the Japanese Americans, to Colorado to internment camps. So they set up for the children to write to children in the camps. And I had a girl named Claire Sato that was my pen pal, and we wrote for a number of years during the war. I don't know if she ever got to go back to California or whatever happened to her, but it was something traumatic in her life, and it was a nice thing that we could do to let them know other people cared about them. I had a cousin, Jimmy Duncan, was killed in Europe, and I had a brother-in-law. He was a very young man, and he was based in Shepherd Field in Texas and then in Biloxi, Mississippi. And he sent me a wooden anchor from Biloxi in 1945, and I was so pleased with that because it was something from a real soldier. And then he became my brother-in-law. I wrote to my brother-in-law every other day, a couple times a week, something like that, because we thought it was really neat to get a letter from a soldier. And of course, I always took it to school and showed it to the other kids and that. They had the canteen down behind the Altoona, where the Altoona post office is now. There was a building which we later used as a teenage club, but it was just called the USO Canteen. And my aunts were school teachers in the Altoona School District and Holliesburg School District, and they would go in there. And when the troop trains would come, the soldiers would open the windows of the trains and just hang out the windows, and they would hold trays up and give them sandwiches, donuts, coffee, whatever they had to serve them. And I can remember troop trains going through the city, 3 and 4 trains a day, lots of times. And of course, a lot of freight trains too. The Red Cross building was across from the Mishler Theater, where the Mishler Theater is, and it was a gorgeous, gorgeous 3-story home with very ornate woodwork and everything. And it happened that a couple that went to our church were the caretakers for the building, so they suggested we go over and get our blood typed. So the government was asking people to do that. So we went over and we all had our blood. They just took a little bit and typed our blood. And since there were 6 of us, they didn't say anything till it was all done. And then when they came back, the lady said, well, we don't tell every family this, but you are your father's children. I didn't understand what it meant at the time, but I certainly do now. We did do some artwork in grade school. We made a big star about 8 inches big, then folded a certain way and slid a ring down over the folded in parts and flattened them out. And then they took them to the Veterans Hospital for favors for their Thanksgiving Day. And I think they put nuts or candy in them. We didn't, but they put something in them to put on each one's tray at the hospital. Another thing we did in grade school, we wove patches on looms with yarn. And my husband's school, they knitted theirs. Well, we weren't taught to knit, but we did weave them. And then the teachers crocheted them together and made afghans for the veterans at the hospitals, which I still do today, only I make them out of corduroy. We were in a movie theater in downtown Altoona, and there started to be a lot of noise outside, and my dad leaned over. He said, I think the war's over. Do you want to stay and finish the movie, or do you want to go out? And we all said, oh, let's go out. So we came out, and we went home and got anything to make noise and came back downtown. People were there with musical instruments and wash tubs and all kinds of stuff just to make a big noise. And it went on for hours till we were too tired and went home.